Hey, what's up you guys, it's Ruthie and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we are going to go into chapter 38 of 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. With this video we have 2 more chapters left to read, and then we have a bonus video that goes to a little bit of the aftermath of this book, but let's get right into this video. This video may contain sensitive topics and foul language. If you do not wish to continue, please click off the video now. You have been warned. Chapter 38. Oliver blinked at her twin looks of shock in his and Maddie's eyes. "What?" he barked, stepping toward Red. "What did you say?" "It was your mom," Red said, looking straight at Oliver. "She's the one who asked me to do it, who set everything up." Oliver straightened, and Red waited for the explosion, for the landmine to trip in his eyes, taking them all with him. She didn't expect what actually happened next. Oliver snorted, his face creasing as that wicked smile stretched through his skin, curling down at the edges. He laughed, the sound eerie and wrong in the too quiet RV. "Don't be ridiculous," he said, slapping himself on the chest. "Our mom is not a criminal." But she was, if he put it like that. And so was Red. Weren't they all, in some way? Had Oliver forgotten that they all knew his secret now, that he killed someone 4 months ago? How could what she and Catherine did be worse than that? "She came to me last August, the day after Joseph Menino was killed, and asked me to say I'd been there, that I saw Frank Gotti leaving the scene." "Don't be ridiculous." Oliver laughed again, swinging his head, but Red wasn't smiling. And then came the switch, tripping in his eyes. "Stop fucking lying, Red." He pointed his finger through her chest, leaving a crater behind. "Stop lying. She wouldn't do that." "It's the truth," Red said, picking her eyes up off the floor. "It's the truth, Maddie." Maddie didn't say anything, wincing as Raina shifted the towel, growing bloody beneath her fingers. "Shut up, Red. Let her talk," Arthur shouted back, rolling his shoulders as he stared Oliver down. "Catherine Lavoie," he said, turning to Red. "And she works in the DA's office? She's the one leading the prosecution against my dad." His eyes narrowed in confusion. "Yes," Red said. "No," Oliver argued over her. "Don't listen to her. She's a liar. I think by now we all know you're a fucking liar." "Keep going, Red," Arthur prompted. "No, you shut up." Oliver charged forward, pushing Red back against the kitchen counter, the tips of his fingers digging into her arms. "Oliver, stop!" Maddie screamed, the sound familiar than before. "Let her speak, please." Oliver thought about it for a moment, searching Red's eyes, nails digging in deeper. Then he let her go, drew back. Red ran her hands down her arms, placing her fingers in the indentions left by Oliver, too big for her. "You okay?" Arthur asked her. "You don't care," she replied. He looked hurt by that, a flicker by his mouth. "Go on, then," Oliver said, head hanging off his neck. "Let's hear the rest of your bullshit story, then." Red coughed, and she didn't know where to look. "Raina was safe. Simon was safe. Catherine told me that Frank Gotti was a terrible man, that he killed or ordered the killings of a lot of people. She said she was sure he did shoot Joseph Menino, but they didn't have enough evidence to prove it in a court of law. That's why they needed an eyewitness." "And what was in it for you?" Simon asked. He looked drained, wrung out, but there wasn't a war zone in his eyes like everyone else's, so Red focused on him. "She said she would pay me for the risk," Red said, sniffing. "After the trial, if they got a conviction, she was going to pay me $20,000. Simon whistled. "Don't be ridiculous," Oliver spat. "Mom doesn't have $20,000 lying around." "But they did. The Lavoies did have that. And more. Catherine had promised her. She said she could give it to Red in cash. It wasn't just that, though," Red carried on, switching to Raina, who wasn't looking. She was staring down at the towel, at the color of Maddie's skin. "I needed that money, yes, like you've all been saying, you know, I need money." Simon shuffled awkwardly. "But it was something else, too. Joseph Menino was shot twice in the back of the head. That's how they executed people, Catherine told me." She glanced over at Arthur. "How his family executed people. Now it made sense why he didn't want to join the family business, not flipping houses, but bodies, drugs." He tried to tell her the truth in small ways. She paused, readying herself for the punch in her gut. "That's how your mom was killed too, 5 years ago. 2 shots to the back of her head. While she was on her knees, she was executed at an abandoned power station on the waterfront in South Philly, pretty close to where Joseph Menino was killed. The police never found out who killed my mom. The case is unsolved, but Catherine, your mom, said she said, eyes finding Maddie, "Your mom told me that though they couldn't never prove it, it was likely someone from that family, someone in the mafia, who killed her. It was their style, and my mom was investigating the family, looking into their network of crimes right around the same time she died. So that makes sense. Maybe she found out something, and they killed her for it. And if it was Frank Gotti's fault that her mom died, then it couldn't be Red's fault, except it still wasn't, was it? There was enough doubt left for Red to fill in with her own guilt. They'd never been able to prove who it was. That was what Catherine said, and she knew about these things, but Red needed the money, and she needed somebody else to blame. And there Catherine was, giving her both everything she needed to fix herself, fix everything. But now the plan was gone, dead. It only worked if no one knew. Maddie winced, gritting her teeth, a high gurgling in her throat. Arthur shook his head, eyes crinkled with confusion. What? Red asked him. He sighed. My dad would never kill a cop. He's smarter than that. It was one of the John Domingo rules, never kill police. It kept the heat off them. Your mom was captain of the police district. Arthur stared at her. No one would have touched her. But Red stuttered. No, don't take it away from her. She needed it. Miss Lavoie said. She works in the DA's office, right? Arthur said, face scrunching even farther, chewing on some silent thought. She's assistant district attorney, Oliver said, cricking his neck. Soon to be district attorney, and she'd never do any of these things Red is saying. My mother is not a criminal. Red is lying. Do not believe her. That's not the name you're after. It wasn't my mom, and what would it even be in it for her, huh? Red, what does she get out of using you to set up Frank Gotti? Oliver's eyes were aflame, burning into hers. She wasn't lying. She wasn't. Well, Simon stepped in. You said it yourself earlier, Oliver, didn't you? You said it's a historic case, and if she gets the guilty conviction, she's pretty much guaranteed to be voted in as DA. He shrugged. She wants to be DA, right? That's what she would get out of it. Don't be ridiculous, Oliver rounded on him now, enough fire in his eyes to be shared around. But Red was watching Arthur instead, a shadow crossing his face as he looked down, thinking, chewing the inside of his cheek. What? She asked him as he jolted back into the room, staring around at the corners of the RV as though it were finally shrinking around them, a countdown to crushing them all. He drew off, swallowed, started again. My family has a contact in the DA's office, has for years, maybe even 10 years now. No one ever knew who it was, though. They always contacted us anonymously, encrypted messages on burner phones. Used to talk only to John Domingo, but then when he started to get sick, they would contact my dad and Uncle Joe, Joseph Menino, I mean. Oliver stared at him, horrified. There's a leak in the DA's office, he asked. Working with organized crime? Arthur nodded. For years. That's how we would find out the identity of witnesses in cases against the family, or the locations of members who had flipped and were cooperating with the police, information about trials and other criminal cases against our competitors. They would get charges dismissed, sometimes shipments of seized guns or drugs for evidence that we could intercept. All of that came from the person inside the DA's office. We paid them for their information into an offshore account, but we never knew who it was until Arthur glanced at Red, an awkward shift in his shoulders, a glint in his eyes. That's how we got your identity, Red, just 2 days after the charges were filed against my dad, when we learned that there was an eyewitness, even though there couldn't be because my dad didn't kill Uncle Joe. My dad told my brother to message this contact to ask who you were. And Red and Oliver said at the same time, and she didn't like it. No, they weren't on the same side. The RV was split again, but Red didn't know where she belonged anymore, with Oliver, who had thrown her out of the RV to her death, who had held a knife to her throat, who forced Maddie into his plan, and now she was dying over there, or Arthur, who had been lying to her from the moment they met last September because he had needed to meet her for his own plan. Of course, he'd shown some interest in her, laughed at her jokes, offered her rides home, charmed her with kind words and kinder eyes. She'd been his mark. What an idiot she was to think there was anything else there. He was here to get information from her and kill her. That was it. And yet Red found herself standing closer to him, edging away from Oliver because the danger was in Oliver's eyes, no one else's. And Arthur answered, looking at Red, not Oliver. He hadn't obviously chosen his side. They told us they needed a day or two to get us the information, and when it came in early September, it didn't come the normal way through their burner phone. My father received an email with Red's name and social security and her home address, and the email address is sent it belonged to Mo Fraser, who works in the DA's office. Oh, of course it's Mo Fraser, Oliver spat. That makes so much sense. So he's in bed with organized crime, isn't he? Arthur shook his head, unsure. Well, we assumed he must have been the contact all this time, and maybe he slipped up on the occasion, but it never sat right with me. He sent that from his work email, his name right there in the sender's address. That leaves a trace somewhere on a server that law enforcement can find. It was so different from all the contact we'd ever known from him. Careless. He got sloppy, Oliver said. They always do. Or Arthur bit down on his lip. Or he wasn't the one who sent it, because he isn't the contact. It was someone trying to pin the leak of Red's identity on him, someone else in the DA's office. His eyes found Red's latching on. Catherine Lavoie, she whispered, and the word escaping from her at the end, hitching up, turning the name into a question. No, it couldn't be. But something was sitting in her gut, hot, sharp, goring through her as it climbed her spine to whisper in her ear. Catherine betrayed you. Catherine gave your name up months ago. No, Catherine couldn't be the one who gave up her name just days after coming to her, asking her to be the witness. Catherine would know what she was giving up Red's name meant, and they would kill her, but it was an inevitable outcome, and Catherine wouldn't do that to her, whether she was the contact working with organized crime or not. She was her best friend's mom, her mom's best friend. There was no way. That was what the feeling in her gut. Solid somehow, and inevitable, sinking deeper and deeper the harder she grappled to understand it. Oliver snorted, stretching out his arms, his eyes a battleground flicking between Red and Arthur. Let me get this straight, he said, playing with his chin. First, Red, you're claiming that my mom came to you, offered to pay you $20,000 to say that you witnessed Frank Gotti committing a murder, all so she could get the guilty conviction and become DA, he said, nodding at Simon, mocking his theory. And now, Arthur, you're claiming that my mom is the same person who has been leaking information to your family for 10 years on the take, and that she must be the one who gave up Red's name but tried to make it look like Mo Frazier leaked it. How does that make any sense? He barked, striding forward, eyes widening as he passed each of them. Those two things entirely contradict each other. Why would she ask Red to be the witness for the trial, but then immediately give up her name, knowing Red would likely be killed and the trial would never go ahead? That makes no sense. Come on, think. You have to think before you throw around baseless accusations about my family. He screwed one finger into the side of his head, too hard, his eyes wild and uncanny calm before the explosion. This is such bullshit, all of it. My mom is not your contact. She prosecutes criminals like you. He jabbed the same finger in Arthur's direction, pointed it like a knife. Your stories don't even make any sense. My mom couldn't have done both, ask Red to be involved to win the trial and then give up her name so the case would never make it to trial. How does that work? But Red's mind was circling something around and around, digging back through the hours of this terrible, terrible night. Maybe there was a way it did make sense. Maybe there was a way this all came back to Catherine Lavoie, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Red couldn't believe it. She'd known Catherine for as long as she could remember, and even before that. But she also couldn't believe the real Oliver she met tonight, the danger flickering just below the surface of his eyes. If he'd done everything that he had tonight, then it was possible Catherine had used Red, betrayed her. Oliver was his mother's son after all. And what was it? That was the phrase she was looking for. Red looked between Maddie and Oliver, trying to extract it from their eyes, that well-known Lavoie expression that always made Red know she was never truly one of them. She dug through the flashes of this never-ending night, Maddie's blood in the handprint on her face, the puzzle of Dawn's blasted open head, the fuzz of static headlights flashing, the red dot on her chest, the check mark on Arthur's hand matching the one on hers, the screaming, the smell of gasoline, shedding each awful part until she found out what she was looking for. They were waiting for her at the back of her mind, and Oliver's clipped voice. Red cleared her throat. A plan must have two parts, she said, repeating Oliver's word, who was in turn repeating his mom. You have to make sure either way plays out in your favor. Arthur looked at her, a shift of understanding in her eyes. That's win-win, he said, parroting Maddie from before. That's the feeling, and Red's gut twisted, sucking in everything around it. She didn't want to believe it, but it was there. It was right there, and Red had to face it. It was never a plan that belonged to Red. They weren't in it together, the two of them. It was one of Catherine's win-win plans, and Red had just been a pawn, thrown away like an expendable disposable. Why her? Did Catherine really not care about her at all? Didn't see her best friend when she looked at Red? Didn't see the ghost of Grace Kinney there too? How could she do this? What are you two talking about? Oliver spat. It does make sense, Red told him, her voice finding its strength from that awful twisted feeling deep in her gut. Perfect sense. Her plan had two parts. In the first scenario, I testify at trial, and Frank Gotti is found guilty because of the successful trial. Your mom is elected DA. In the second part, she gives up my name when asked, and Frank Gotti's family kills me, so the trial never goes ahead. But when they investigate where the leak came from, they'll find That email Mo Fraser sent, it will look like he leaked my name. He'd be removed from office, charged with whatever crime that is. You said it yourself earlier, Oliver. Mo Fraser is your mom's biggest competition to becoming DA, her only competition. If they killed me, it would take Mo out of the running. In either scenario, your mom wins, she becomes DA. She caught her breath. When, she said darkly, because in one of those wins she was dead, and somehow Catherine was okay with that. Oliver Lavoie had thrown her out of the RV to die, and Catherine Lavoie had thrown out her name, half expecting her to die, playing that to her favor. Liar. Catherine Lavoie was a liar. Arthur was a liar too, and so was she, whatever the second yes vote belonged to, but Catherine was a worse liar somehow, and Arthur had said he was trying to keep Red alive, that this was the last resort. Was that a lie too? Red felt bile rising up her throat, swallowing it down as she avoided everyone's eyes, wiping a line of sweat from her top lip. 6 of them in this RV, and at least 5 of them were liars, including Red. But she wasn't lying anymore. Everything was out and everything was gone. That's it. This is ridiculous, Oliver said, because clearly he had no other word for it. None of this is true. My mom didn't do any of that. You know her, Red. How could you accuse her of these things? I'm not accusing, Red replied, and that twisted feeling flipped over, unfolding into rage, and rage was red, just like shame. She felt the heat of it in her cheeks. It happened. She's the one that offered to pay me to be the witness, told me that Frank Gotti was probably the man who murdered my mom. She manipulated me, and then she gave up my name to them. Shut up, you stupid little girl, Oliver spat, switching his gaze to Arthur. Do not listen to her. She's clearly misunderstood something here. My mom is not the person you are looking for. It's not her. Don't listen. Oliver, stop, Maddie croaked, her head resting back against the refrigerator door like she was too weak to hold it up now. No, Oliver looked at her, but Maddie didn't shrink back from him. There was nowhere for her to go. Red's lying, he shouted. She's going to get Mom killed, and she's lying. What if she isn't lying, Maddie said, wincing at the wounds whistled through her throat. Maybe it's true. And as weak as Maddie was, bleeding out on the floor over there, skin as soft as ever but far too pale, she was still taking care of Red, her job, her responsibility, though Red had never asked her to. Maddie wasn't like Oliver or their mom. Maddie was a real and kind and good, and if she could stand, she'd be standing on Red's side of the RV, wouldn't she? The 2 of them against Oliver, and Red couldn't think right now about where Arthur stood in all of that. Maybe it's true, Oliver shouted at her, spit foaming out of the sides of his mouth. You think it's true that Mom has been working with an organized crime group for the past decade, being paid to dismiss cases and give them information? Do you think that sounds like our mom, Madeline? You think she'd fabricate a case against Frank Gotti, pay Red to be a witness, all to become DA? Does that sound like Mom to you? He demanded. Any of it? I don't know, Maddie said, pressing her eyes shut. You don't know, Oliver bent over her. You think that sounds like Mom, do you? The mom who still cuts your sandwiches into triangles for you? The one who says whoopsie daisy whenever she drops anything? Does she sound like a criminal to you, Maddie? Red could see the red patches climbing the back of Oliver's neck as he bore down on his sister, his head falling at the same angle as she, and she knew now that it was a warning sign. An explosion was coming. The mom who has personalized ringtones for the entire family, sweet family memories. You think she's a criminal? You think the mom who has a doorbell ringtone for you because as a kid you thought you had to ring the doorbell before going in and out of the house? You think the woman who would do something that sweet is a criminal? Something caught Red's attention, pulled at it. What? She asked. She said, staring at the back of Oliver's head, your mom's ringtone for Maddie is the harp. Red has been with Catherine Lavoie many times over the past 6 months, meeting in secret, going over her testimony, working out where she could have been before and after the murder without being caught by cameras in case Frank Gotti's defense team checked. Maddie had called her mom a couple of times and Red had heard it, the harp ringtone, plucking up and down, probably a joke that from that time when Maddie was 15 and insisted she wanted to learn the harp to impress a boy in orchestra, giving up after a second lesson because no boy is worth that. Red was sure about it. Your mom's ringtone for Maddie is a harp, she insisted. Oliver glanced back at her, the explosion delayed for now. Right, he said, breathing hard. It is now, I think, but when Maddie first got a cell phone, it was a doorbell for a long time, because that's Mom's favorite story to tell about Maddie. I think she changed it a few years ago. Doorbell, Red said, sounding the word out of his lips like it wasn't a word at all, scattering the sounds of nonsense. Doorbell, one of the sounds of her shame that lived with her deep in her gut. The sound she heard in the background of that final phone call with her mom twice, her mom's strange hello after she heard it. Except it was impossible. The police told her she must have imagined it, or maybe she was confused. Her mom was found in the abandoned power station, no residential roads nearby at all, no houses, no doorbells. It wasn't possible, but Red had heard it. She heard the sound, and she never forgot. She never forgot the last phone call, not a second of it. Doorbell ringtone, she said, sounding out the possibility, memory shifting, slotting into new places. What are you talking about, Oliver? Spat, eyes flashing. Red didn't know she didn't know yet, but there was an awful, sickening feeling trying to drag her down. She pushed up against it, feet lifting from the floor as she darted to the kitchen counter for the saucepan of phones waiting there. Red lifted off the lid and peered inside, looking for her own phone. She pulled it out, the home screen telling her it was down to 12% battery, no service still. That was because the engineers were only just starting to work on the broken cell tower. Had they heard her on the walkie-talkie before Arthur smashed it? She had no way of knowing if they had. If one of them had been pressing the button at the same time, then Red's voice would have been lost in the dying night, never found, never heard. Focus. Focus on the doorbell. Something inside was telling her this was important. Maddie might be dying, but the police might or might not be on their way, but the doorbell was important. Red unlocked her phone and tapped into the settings app. Her thumb moved down in the sounds and haptics menu option, and she opened it. She scrolled down to the section labeled sounds and vibration patterns and clicked to bring up all the options for ringtones. Her eyes skipped down the list, past Cosmic, the Night Owl, and Senka, thumb spooling the words up against the page in a blur. No, it wasn't here. Right at the bottom was another click-through menu called Classic. Red pressed it, and a new list appeared on screen. Alarm ascending, bark, bell tower. Red's eyes kept going through the rest of the bees, past crickets, and then there it was, doorbell, sitting just above duck in the list. Red turned the volume on the device all the way up to the top and then pressed her thumb against the doorbell ringtone, heart in her mouth like it already knew the answer. Her phone dinged, a high double chime pattern, up then down. Red pressed it again and again. That was it, the doorbell. The doorbell. That exact sound she heard during the last phone call with her mom, the phone call that changed everything, ripped the world apart. This was it. It wasn't a doorbell because the police were right. It couldn't be. It was a ringtone. Catherine Lavoie's ringtone. What are you doing? Oliver asked her, his shoulders shifting, staring down at her phone in Red's hand. Your mom, Red said, her voice breaking, splitting in half. I think your mom was there. Where? Oliver's eyes narrowed. Red tried to speak, tripping over her own breath too fast, throat closing in around it. With my mom, when she was killed. That is the end of chapter 38. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!